Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're gonna give people a minute or so to get into the webinar room, and then we will get started. Okay, looks like we have a majority of the people in. Again, good morning and welcome to our webinar today, Building Your Coalition Through Effective Leadership. Our presenter today is Erin Ficker. This webinar is brought to you by the Great Lakes PTTC and SAMHSA. The Great Lakes ATTC, MHTTC, and PTTC are funded by SAMHSA under the following cooperative agreements. The opinions expressed in this webinar are the views of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the official position of DHHS or SAMHSA. The PTTC network believes that words matter, and it uses affirming language that inspires hope in all of our activities. We have some housekeeping details for you today. If you are having technical issues, please individually message Christina Spanbauer or Stephanie Bellman in the chat section, and they'll be happy to help you. The recording and PowerPoint slides for this webinar will be posted on our website. It can take up to 7 to 10 days. We will be using automated transcriptions for today's webinar. You will be sent a link after this presentation to a very short survey, and we would really appreciate it if you can fill it out. It takes about 3 minutes, and it's how we report our activities back to SAMHSA. Certificates of attendance will be sent, certificate of attendance links will be sent to all who attend the full session. They can take up to 2 weeks and they'll be in your email. If you'd like to see what else we're doing, please follow us on social media. And if you're on our mailing list, look for our weekly updates events on Thursdays for the following week. Again, I am excited that our presenter today is Erin Ficker. For more than 16 years, Erin has worked in substance use prevention, supporting communities to use evidence-based strategies and data-driven processes in substance use prevention, planning, and implementation. She works with community-level practitioners and schools in the development, implementation, and evaluation and sustainability of prevention activities. So I'm excited to turn it over to her.
Thanks, Anne, and thank you all for being here today. I'm excited, and we're just going to jump right in. So I'm going to just make sure everyone can see my screen. And what I wanted to get started, so Anne's introduced me. I'm Erin Ficker. I'm one of the prevention managers here at Great Lakes PTTC, and this is one of my most favorite topics, building coalitions through effective leadership. Well, we're really going to talk about the ways that leaders work in coalitions and how you can be a more effective leader from any position at that coalition table. So I was hoping you guys could share with me in the chat your name. Well, your name will be there. So you can just list your role. So what role do you have on your coalition? Are you a coalition leader, coordinator? Are you a member? Are you interested in starting a coalition? What kind of role do you play within your coalition? And then how long have you been a part of coalition work in your community? So we'll just take a minute to see if you guys can add in the chat there. So 3 weeks, goodness, welcome. Wonderful. 1 year, 5 years, 11 years. Oh my goodness, that's fantastic. 11 years, 8 years, we have prevention specialists and coalition coordinators, 10 plus years. It goes so fast, you guys. 7 months, that's great. 3 years, oh my goodness, so exciting. I've been a member for 4 years. Oh my goodness, that's amazing. Thank you for that work. Great. Genesee Health Systems, we got 3 weeks. Good morning. Okay, well, they look at this board members for 4 years, and we have people all across the spectrum. I think 11 years was the longest I saw, 3 weeks was the shortest. So this is fantastic. Know that everyone, regardless of how much time you've been a part of this work, has something to add. So please feel free to ask questions or share information in the chat. We learn from each other regardless of our experience. So great. So thank you for taking the time to do that. It's helpful to see kind of who we have here and what work you've been doing. Today, our goals or objectives are really to make sure that we describe characteristics of effective coalition leaders, that we define leading and managing. So we're gonna talk about leadership and management and kind of how those work together and how they're the same and how they're different. We're going to identify ways to support and lead coalition members, and then describe ways that you can grow in your own leadership skills. So again, in the chat, I'd love for you to brainstorm with me what the word coalition brings to mind for you. So when you hear the word coalition, what pops up for you? What jumps into your mind? For me, and you can go ahead and just write in the chat, community, multi-sector partnerships, collaborative efforts, working together, grassroots, I like that one, cooperation, movement, oh, I like that one too, working together, working towards a goal, community collaborative from different agencies, co-op, that's a good one, community action, these are great, you guys. Gang, we're the gang. Partnership, community collaboration, connection. Perfect. Partnerships with resources. Oh, that's a nice way to say it. Communities forming solutions. These are all, I mean, you guys like you got to all my little cheats in like 10 seconds. Dream work. Dream work makes the team work. Sorry, that was from Little League. So absolutely, these are great examples of kind of the things we think of when we think of coalition, because it is really that coming together of the community with a focus in mind. Alliance, ooh, that's a good one. I like that one. So let's see what some of the key definitions of coalition are. So one is this idea that coalition is a diverse group of individuals and agencies with deep connections to local community. And with those deep connections, and they influence population behavior for healthy communities. They gather collaboratively to solve community problems and are driven by citizen identified issues. I really like this definition because I think it's really nice and broad, right? There's all kinds of things you do, and it focuses broadly on things like population behavior for healthy communities. We're not pigeonholing that work, but we're staying fairly broad in this definition. I like the idea of deep connection as well, right? So these aren't like superficial connections, these are deep connections in the local community. So when I think about kind of creating healthy communities or addressing issues identified by the community, you think that you're going to have to get a lot of people around that table. So the other definition I have, let me see if it's, oops. So the other definition I have that I like is it's a formal agreement for collaboration between groups or sectors in the community where each group, and I love this part, retains its identity, but everyone agrees to work together toward a common goal. And you are going to hear me talk about toward a common goal or a common vision or a shared goal a lot today. That's really a big part of this work, and that's what we're going to hear me talk about repeatedly. So how does this, give me a thumbs up if this is a definition that makes sense to you, or put in the chat if you like this definition, and I'll just get a feel for if this rings true for you guys. Cool, love it, great, thumbs up, cool, sure does, great, perfect. And a lot of what we're doing when we think, well, and I'll move into this. Okay, we'll get into this. Oh, love it. Everyone's so positive. Great. So, but there are things also that there's things that a coalition is, and then there's things that a coalition are not. And sometimes it's helpful to just identify quickly what are those key things that a coalition is not, right? So a coalition is not run by an outside organization. So someone's not running this, doing all the work, and then people show up at the table and have lunch and leave, right? So it's not run by an outside organization. It's not just one human services organization. It's not a single entity. So while the coalition is a network or a collaboration or an alliance, it's not a single entity. And it is most definitely, and I think this is the piece that's most important when we're thinking about leadership, is it is not a top-down operation. And when we typically think about the things that come to mind when we immediately think about leadership are often things that work in top-down organizations. So this is absolutely one of the key things, I think, for our presentation, our conversation today. I will say also that this comes from a really great book that I would encourage you guys to look into called What Coalitions Are Not by Tom Wolfe. So if you want to look that up, I would really encourage you to take a look at it. It's very, I think it's very helpful. Okay. So I want to ask you guys, when you think of a leader you respect, so there's someone who you respect out there. What kind of person are they? How do they see the world? What do they value? How does this leader treat people? Yeah, the author's Tom Wolfe with 2 F's. Oh, thank you. That is very helpful, Christina, super fast. So what kind of person are they, this leader? So right in the chat, an example of a leader that values respect and inclusion and delegation. I love the delegation piece, right? So I have a leader I really respect, and he is really, he's kind. He sees the world from a really big perspective. Like he's always looking from this global vision. I mean, he values people. He values the people who work for him. He values the people he works with. And how does this leader treat people? Most of the time, everybody has their minutes, but most of the time with respect and encouragement. So you think of someone, Nikki, who's a team player, respectful, receptive, and understanding. Those are great. A servant leader. So that's one area of leadership that people talk about a lot, which is servant leadership, is that they do things for the greater good, for the group, to lift up others. Emphasizes independence, empowers the individuals to be creative, innovative, respectful, open-minded, honest, respectful and welcoming, values people and their individual skills that he is good at cultivating for the greater good. These are great. Yeah, so I always find that in leadership settings where I'm called to leadership, or I'm in a de facto leadership role, I really have to think about how I often go back and think about like people I respect and how would they respond, right? So when I'm struggling as a leader, I'm like, okay, how would so-and-so respond to this? What frame of mind would they put on with this? So I think it's always helpful to just think about what it is, who are some leaders who you can keep in the back of your mind as someone who can be that example for you. So let's get a little defining about leadership. And this leadership definition is funny to me, and I use it for a reason, but there are 4 points here, and I'm going to take them one by one, because the first one is it's the art of motivating people to act to achieve a common goal. And I think that's really essential in coalition leadership. That idea of our leadership where you're motivating people to act for a common goal. The second one, inspiring others to act while directing the way that they act. Now that's a real traditional view of leadership, but it's also something you need to have to be able to understand and do, but it's really kind of a traditional, more top-down view of leadership. Knowing the best way to use resources at an organization's disposal, right? So one of the roles leaders play is managing and distributing often, and understanding how to utilize resources, including, and I think in a coalition, this is the one you're managing most often, is human resources, right? The people, which are our biggest and most important resource on a coalition. Well, sometimes money is nice, but right, without our people, we're not anything. So And then the last one, directing activities of others for the good of all. So it's similar to the first one, but a little different because it's more active, right? So it's not motivating them, but it's directing. And so in some coalitions, there is a delegation and a direction that's going to happen. And in others, it's more about motivating or collaborating, or it's less active. So that is another one that I think of as a little bit more of a top-down approach. But so those are the kind of what is leadership? What is the acts of leadership? But I want to know, what are the characteristics of a good leader? Because to me, that's more important. Like, what do you do? Okay, I can figure that. But what do I need to be able to do? What are the characteristics that a leader needs to have? When I'm looking for someone to lead us, what do I want in that person? And these are, I find, really perfect, right? Humility. Oh, thank you. That's a great one, Carrie. So the ones, and this comes from actually the NIATEX model, which was created at the University of Wisconsin. Leaders are organized, persistent, innovative, focused, optimistic, and comfortable with data. And I'm going to tell you that in a coalition, I think 3 of these are the most important. And you can type in the 3 that you think are most important, but I'm going to tell you what my 3 are. And I'm going to go backwards. So one of them I think is most important is being comfortable with data. Our coalitions run off of data so that we know what it is that our communities need most, and how will we measure that we've made good change, and how will we know? So you have to be able, as the leader, even if you're not the epidemiologist and even if you're not the data source, data provider, you have to be comfortable, right, with that. And so people are saying optimistic, innovative, organized, great. So my first one is comfortable with data. My second one, oh, Clara, you and I are on the same page, is optimistic. You, as a leader of a coalition, need to project optimism to your group. If they don't, can people hear me? I got a note that people can't hear me. Okay, good. So you have to promote optimism. You have to make people believe and follow you. And if you have a pessimistic view, that's not going to happen. And the last one that I think is the most important is persistent. This work is slow, it is hard, and the role of the leader is often to get people to believe in it. So I use the expression that you need to be pleasantly persistent and persistently pleasant, right? So you have to be nice, and you have to keep being nice and keep pushing. So pleasantly persistent and persistently pleasant, I think, are some of the key characteristics. So those 3 are my favorite. But there are things that make, so we talked a little about leadership broadly and the skills that a leader needs, but there are things that make coalition leadership even more unique, right? So part of it is that you have a combination of paid staff members and volunteers. So you're going to have some people who are there as part of their jobs. You're going to have people who are there just out of the kindness of their heart and the interest in the topic. And then you're going to have people who are paid to work on the coalition often. So a lot of times you'll have a coalition leader whose job it is to get paid. Part of their job is to manage and run that coalition. And some of it is volunteers. So that's a dicey combination sometimes. Another thing that makes it unique is the motivation of membership, that's based on a collective sense of purpose and goals. And this gets back to that shared goal and mission that I promised you I would talk about all the time. So you need to be able, the coalition needs motivated members to run, and it's your role through recruitment to ensure that there's an understanding of the work that you want to do. And so that's just this whole layer of leadership. This whole layer of leadership that's maybe different in coalition work. Evolving membership roles for staff. So, right, you sometimes can have a revolving door of membership, of people who are involved. So keeping that shared vision alive while you have people moving in and out can be difficult, but you also want to have evolving leadership roles. You want that membership to start taking up leadership and ownership of the coalition. So while that's a goal, it can also be a challenge. So knowing that we know what leaders need to be, and knowing now that we know what are the specific challenges that coalition leaders face, we need to talk a little bit about what are the characteristics that effective coalition leaders need to have. And we've kind of touched on these, but I want to get a little deeper. And one is efficiency and work focus. So often you will have little time to work on this, right? You will not have, your full-time job. So you really need to be efficient and focused. Collaborative leadership style. So this is where you're not, and we'll talk a little bit about this more as we go, but you're not, again, not this top-down model where I'm the decider and I'm the decider and you're going to do what I say. It's more collaborative where we're bringing people into the leadership fold. We're helping to develop their skills, to get their buy-in, and to build their interest in the coalition. So that's key. There's also the need for cohesion of the group. So you're going to have to manage that, right? As the leader, it's your role to build that cohesion and that interest in that group, and keeping people in this positive working environment, right? So that they feel like it's, again, that optimism that we talked about earlier, and bringing that group together for that shared vision. Mobilizing skills. So again, this is that you have to be able to mobilize people. This is like a lot of our work is community organizing on some level, right? Bringing people to the table, mobilizing all of those resources that we have in the community and the work that's being done is essential. And then last, the topic or process knowledge. So you can have knowledge of the topic area, but I think it's almost more important to have knowledge of how processes work. What's the process you're going to do? What's the process you're going to use to move through your coalition, to move through your decision making and your implementation? And there's a lot of different models that we can use, including the strategic prevention framework, but there are others as well. So being able to manage and understand that. And there are a couple of people who've made comments, and I just wanted to make a note that Gwendolyn had said you have to keep everyone engaged so they feel that they are a part of the coalition. And that is so important, right? Making people feel like their role is essential. And again, we'll kind of continue to touch on that theme as we go. So I've talked about this idea of top-down leadership kind of versus collaborative leadership. And a lot of the work that I've done in leadership comes from the idea of managing change, right? From quality improvement, where we're managing change or we're promoting change, navigating change. And that's a lot of what coalition leadership and coalitions are doing, which is they're working towards making community-wide change and having an impact. And so that is really the work of change. And so a lot of this information that I come with comes from that quality improvement background. So that being said, this next slide, I want to focus on, if we think of this first column here on the left as the top-down leadership, you're going to have to shift, right? So if you're traditionally been in this role of top-down leadership, even if you don't think of yourself and your work this way, you may kind of subconsciously be doing this. So you need to shift from this concept of individual heroics, right? So I'm going to save this group, I'm going to lead this, and I'm going to do all these things, and it's going to make everything better, to collaborative actions. So what can we do? And again, it's that making people feel a part of it, but it's also leveraging their experience and their resources. Again, this is that optimism. You have to shift from despair and cynicism to hope and possibility. And how do you do that? Really staying focused on optimism towards that common goal. You have to move from a perspective, and a lot of leaders do this unconsciously, and this kind of their fallback is to blame others for problems, right? To say, well, you didn't do the thing I assigned you to do, you didn't you didn't come to meetings, this isn't working because your program's not being run effectively. So we need to take responsibility for challenges, right? As leaders, really, it's that sign on the presidential desk, the buck stops here, right? And for the leader, it's also important to say, you take responsibility and let's problem solve with this group. So going back to collaborative action based on the problems you're dealing with. You have to move from a scattered, disconnected series of activities. So I'm a leader and I'm managing all these things that are happening here to purposeful, interconnected actions. And as you move into coalition and network models, you have to have purposeful, interconnected actions in order to meet that common shared goal. It's incredibly important. You can't be self-absorbed. You can't be focused on your work, your contributions, what's happening with you, how overburdened you are. You really need to come at it. And a lot of people talked about this with humility and with generosity. You need to shift from that kind of focus on you as the leader at the center to this generous, more concerned for the common good. So those are some great, and this comes from a resource called Managers Who Lead. And a lot of what I'm going to bring to you now comes from this document. It's a really big document, but it's amazing. And I think there's a lot that anyone can glean from this resource. I use it a lot in my work, and it's really informed my work, but also kind of the training and things I share with others. So I just encourage you to go to that. It is a change focused document, but again, the work we do in coalitions is all about change, right? So if we think about leading change, if we're leading a coalition, we're leading the people, but what are we doing when we lead to focus the change, right? So that's really the goal. So there's leading people, and then there's leading this initiative and this change. And really the work we're doing is about community change. So we think about the importance of communicating urgency by framing the challenge well, right? How do we communicate the urgency without being pessimistic, without being being full of despair? How do we communicate that? You have to build a core team. So you have to have people who can work closely with you, and not everyone on that coalition is going to be as involved. So building that and knowing who those core people are is important. You have to be able to create and communicate that shared vision, because we work together on what are the shared contributing factors that we can all work towards addressing. You have to include others in planning. This is essential. Again, we talked kind of about this, where people said you have to make people feel a part of it. And if they're not included in the planning, if they're not included in decision making, they're going to fall away. They're going to walk away because they don't feel like their contribution is important. You have to work on overcoming obstacles together. That's so key. If you don't overcome obstacles together, then you get back on blame. You get back on kind of this, this self-absorbed, I have to take care of everything. So we have to focus those together. You want to focus on results. And that is important, to not think about, to really focus on what are the things we want to do. And that's why you have to be data savvy, so that you can look at that and say, are we getting results? And if we're not, how can we adapt and overcome obstacles that are in our way? How can we identify them? Create opportunities for short-term wins. When we have people who have different goals in their daily work and different perspectives, getting them to the table is hard. But if they don't feel like they have short-term easy wins, again, they'll start to fall away. If we came in and said, substance use prevention, we're not going to see real results for 5 to 10 years, everyone's going to get up and be like, I don't have time for this. What? But if you can focus on short-term wins, like we educated people, we got into schools, we trained facilitators, we talked to legislators. If you can focus on small process-related wins, it'll be really helpful to that group. And if communicating those. Maintain support for facing challenges. So again, that kind of gets back to overcoming obstacles together. So maintaining the support from everyone in the face of challenges is important. Micro habits, that's really a great term. I think it's Juno. Thank you so much. That's a great I really like that, that perspective there, micro habits. Maintain support. Okay. Oh, and then make change stick, right? So that's going to be one of the things you have to do as a leader, is to figure out not just how we're going to make this change, but then how are we going to maintain this change? And that's the follow through that's really hard. You know, people get really excited. Hey, we got this win. We got these programs in schools, but how are you going to make sure that that becomes part of the organizational culture or the community culture, and how are you going to make it stick? So you have to be, as a leader, thinking further ahead than the work you're currently in. Oh. Okay, so I want to just take a pause before we go into leading versus managing and ask if there are any questions.
Thanks, Erin. We do have one. Derek says, just taking on as the, just starting as the program coordinator for the coalition, is it appropriate to send out emails to all the members, especially those who have not been in attendance for a while, to check in with them and verify that they're going to continue to work on the coalition?
100%. That's a great idea. Personal outreach, individual connections are as important as group process and group focus, right? You need to, and someone mentioned this in the chat, and I think, you know, we keep coming back to it, is a sense of belonging and a sense of kind of inclusion and importance, like that each member has an important thing to contribute. And we'll get a little into this in a minute, but it's important to know how every member of the coalition works, how they engage, and what level they can be involved at. So we'll get to that in a little bit. So it's a great question. I think it's absolutely essential. So yeah, I think it's a great idea. I would totally do that. And we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, so managers who lead, that document that I shared with you, it talks about what happens when you're the program coordinator, but you're not like everyone's boss. How do you lead from a manager's position, right? So you're not in charge, you don't have authority maybe, but you have a role of leadership. So it talks a lot about that, balancing that, and how do you do that? And I think it's fantastic. So again, I can't say enough good things about it. So you also got a lot of great comments here from your colleagues. And one of the people said, you know, engaging members is essential, the 100 cups of coffee approach. So that's the idea that you're going to go out and have coffee with all these different people to get them involved and share your vision, communicate that vision, and communicate that optimism and excitement, frame the issue, that 100 cups of coffee. I think it's a great, Kelly, thank you for that. Key to ask what led to their involvement, right? So if you're coming into a coalition new as a leader, you need to get to know those folks as quickly as possible. 1,000 cups of coffee, maybe it's 1,000. I have that many a day, so I get it. Absolutely. So those are all great contributions. Thank you guys so much. And, you know, keep an eye on that chat, because you're going to see a lot of great things from your colleagues. Okay, so let's talk about
quick, Erin, sorry, one more really quick, which I think is appropriate to address right now, is how can we celebrate the small wins and help the members keep the big picture in mind?
Oh, that's great. That's a great question. So I think it's a key that you're always connecting small wins to goals, right? So if your goal is to create healthy communities, and some of the things that you're promoting are things like having an active community coalition, getting programs to youth, if you're focused on changing policies, if you're focused on rolling out communications and education, right? Take that down and talk about the progress you're making towards that. So then the progress is we trained 75 educators. We have 80% of our middle schools involved. We've talked to 17 lawmakers. Those things are progress that you can celebrate, but still keeps the focus on we're talking to them and we have more work to do. Boy, isn't it great that we got these 17 meetings? Isn't it wonderful that we have 13 billboards, or, you know, whatever it is that you've accomplished? Think about that process work, tie it to your outcome and your ultimate goals. If we can get legislators on board, if we can get lawmakers on board, then we can really start to build healthier communities. So it's a lot of in your framing of how you make those celebrations. Does that help? Hopefully that helped. Okay, let's keep going unless there's any other questions.
Nope, no other questions.
Great, thanks. Okay, so management versus leadership. And this is, I want to be clear that we are often called upon to do both of these things. So I'm not saying that management is bad or leadership is far superior. What I'm saying is they're different. And it's important to keep that understanding about when am I managing and when am I leading? And how do I make sure that those roles are both blended and distinct? Because you have to do both. Sorry. So management is really bottom line focused. It's, you know, how are we going to accomplish these tasks? And a lot of times you have to be able to do that. So the combination we make is like management is about doing things right. In leadership, it's going to deal with that bigger picture. And I think I mentioned this when I talked about the leader that I respect, is that he has this capacity to see the world in kind of this big picture way. So leadership really needs to be focused on big pictures, on outcomes, on that common goal. What do we want to accomplish? We want to build healthier communities. We want to have healthier youth. We want to have, you know, greater social emotional learning resources for youth. You know, there's all kinds of things. We want to reduce overdose and increase, you know, our healthy communities through the reduction of overdoses in our community. All kinds of things. So what do we want to accomplish? And that's the role of that big picture for that leader. Leadership is about doing the right thing, and management is about doing things right. Right? It's a lovely little turn of phrase. And I think it's important to think about it that way. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And that leadership goals are super important to our collaborative work. So keeping that in mind, I just want you to hold that in your head. So I want to talk to you about growing and supporting your coalition, and truly growing and supporting your coalition should be the focus of your leadership, right? You want to make sure that you are growing them and supporting them in a way that helps you get towards that goal. So again, the most important thing is focusing on the goal, but it's also key that in order to get you towards that goal or that ultimate outcome is that you're building and supporting your coalition members and your coalition as a collective. Excuse me. So get to know your coalition members. So I kind of alluded to this earlier, and someone kind of asked about this a little bit, is what are their dreams for the community? What are their hopes? Like, I don't need to know that their dream is to go to Hawaii. I need to know what's their dream for this community. And it may not be the same dream as everybody else at the table, or everybody at the table may have a different dream, but it also may be that that work together will lead to outcomes together. If your outcomes are ultimately a healthy community, you know, having someone who can focus on housing and jobs and adult education and youth, substance misuse, those all come together. So their dream may be that everyone in the community is housed, and that ultimately helps lead to your outcomes. So it may be that they want to educate faith communities. There's all kinds of different ways that people have dreams for their communities. What's their motivation? Are they there for power? Are they there to be affiliated? Is this a job requirement? So sometimes that happens, and then how do you keep those folks motivated? So understanding the motivation for what brings, oh, I'm sorry, am I going too fast? Thank you, sorry, thank you. I sometimes get really excited. So is there motivation, achievement, affiliation, power, or job requirement? And when you have someone who's focused with a job requirement, you really are, you may have a different, it may be more difficult to get them motivated. So it's really important to know that either in recruitment or once they're at the table. And I say at the table, but that's not necessarily what it is. You know, there's not always a physical table that you come around or a virtual meeting that everyone contributes to. There are other ways people participate in coalition. So you want to understand also their work style. How do they think about the work? Are they really focused on their own work? Are they a big picture person or a detailed person? You know, do they have to think in kind of concrete or more global ways? What are the ways they kind of understand and approach their work? What's their preferred role? So everyone has a different kind of role that they come in. Some people want to be leaders. Some people want to be just supporters or observers. Some people are always going to be opponents. They're always going to come in with kind of a defeatist or contrary approach. And that's not always bad as long as you can harness it, right? So what's the role that they want to play? And then how can you ensure that that fits well into the group's dynamic? How do they want to participate? And we're going to get to that in a little bit in more detail. But how do they want to participate? Because not everybody can, will, or should participate at the same level at the same time. The preferred, and then what's the best way to communicate with them? And that's an important question to ask during those 1,000 million cups of coffee, right? Is what works best? Can I text you? Can I email you? Do you want to have a phone call? Can we do a Zoom meeting? There's all kinds of different ways that people engage. Okay. So the PowerPoint will be available as well as there'll be a recording available. Thanks. I'm sorry if I'm going fast. It's my excitement for the work. Okay. Who's at your table? Give me a thumbs up or a hand raise if you are required to have 12 sectors at the table. No idea. Great. That's fine. Yep. The number of people with hands raised is like going up really fast. Yep. We have lots of people who are saying yes here. So in some of the prevention work, there are 12 sectors that you are required to have at the table. And some people continue to think, yep, that's a good approach, right? Is to have the 12 sectors. If it's a requirement, by all means, do that. If it is not, let me be clear that it's okay to invite other people or to have a gap in that for ever or for a period of time. So the 12 sectors can sometimes box us in and have us focused more on checking boxes that I have someone from the faith community, I have someone from the recovery community, I have someone from schools, I have someone from business, and really can keep us locked in that box. And I see some people who are agreeing with me. If it's a requirement for you, I recognize that that's important, and it's always important to keep your funder happy and to meet your requirements. But if it's not, I really want you to think beyond that group and think about thinking about a more collective or network impact and ways that shared goals across community sectors can influence the work of making healthier communities. Coalitions are living organisms and very fluid. Thank you, Elizabeth. That's fantastic. But we should break toxic relationships even with funders, right? You know, that's a hard question. Funders are hard people to break relationship with, but yeah, if you have relationships that aren't working, by all means, find a way to either improve that relationship or step away from it in a way that's doesn't cause rifts or problems, right? So you have to be careful about conflict within the group that can cause problems. Yeah, someone said there are hidden sectors. I think that's really great to think about. So they're not, that list of 12 may not be inclusive of hidden sectors that can influence the ability to become a healthy community. Excuse me. What are barriers from keeping them at the table? So there are things that are going to make it difficult for people to be at the table. Time is probably a big one. You know, buy-in. Do they really believe that they need to be there? A variety of schedules, timing of meetings or timing of work, which is again why I encourage you to think of this work, and I think prevention and other coalition work is moving away from everybody come sit at my table to talk about substance misuse prevention, and then everybody else come sit at the same table in another environment to talk about other, housing. Everybody comes sit at this table to talk about law enforcement. That becomes problematic, or you just move what I refer to as the STP, or the same 10 people, from one topic to the next. But think more broadly about how do you network people in who have similar experiences. So I encourage you to think about it that way. How else can you involve them to advance your work? So if people can't be in person, or they can't be at the table, or they can't be engaged in that core team, how can you involve them? And maybe that's that you have one-on-one meetings with them, or maybe that is that you share email communication and follow up with them, and think about how their work contributes to your goals and how your work contributes to their goals, and really sharing that back and forth. Sorry. So thinking about who's there, who's not there, and how do they participate. Okay. So I talked a little bit about this in terms of networks. And in traditional coalitions that we've been working with for the past 35 plus years are really what we consider a hub and spoke model, right? So there's a center, and then there's individuals who may or may not be connected, but are going to come to the table together. And you've brought them all in. A network model is more how members connect to each other, right? So it's more, and you can see my little graphic, people connecting to each other and either bringing those folks in, keeping them up to date, considering their contributions, whether they're at the table or not, but helping them understand our common goals and the work we do towards it. And there's a lot of great resources out there on network models that I encourage you to consider. So there's Impact Networks is a great book that I've been plugging through for the last couple months, that talks about the impact of a network as opposed to kind of a traditional coalition. And especially if bringing everyone to the same table and sitting down and having a conversation with 12 sectors is not getting you results, consider different ways to work around that. Consider ways to build maybe a hybrid model where you have a smaller coalition, and ways that you can have also a network beyond that. So create connections around shared goals, encourage or engage with those whose goals impact your goals. So when we think about all of the things that contribute to substance misuse, which are poverty and housing and jobs, all of those things that kind of contribute to those problems, those issues in your community, think about how to engage those where their goals will impact and inform your goals. Consider a win-win partnership. My work in substance misuse prevention is going to influence, your work in creating healthy communities through behavioral health care in the community, or whatever the relationship is where you can find a win-win, and identify necessary levels of engagement. I'm sorry, that sounds terrible. So I have a slide that I want to skip to, and I have to see if I can find it. So I am going to just show you this and then come back to my other slides. So think about their level of engagement. And I love this. If you've been in a training that I've done, I find a way to squeeze this slide into everything I do. But your coalition members and members of your expanded network have different levels that they can be engaged at different times. So thinking about law enforcement, you may really need them to be higher up the steps where they're thinking about coordination and collaboration. If you're thinking about training law enforcement to do party patrols or train officers in response to different events, then they may need to be at that collaboration step. But as your work is progressing and you maybe are thinking about expanding the work to different strategies, they can come down that and be maybe more in just cooperation or networking. So all of your folks can kind of move up and down this ladder from no involvement to really true collaboration on the work. So I just encourage you to think about this and how much engagement each member really needs to be a part of. So I'm going to jump back here. Are there questions about this? Can we take a quick minute for questions?
We do have one question. What is your advice on making coalition meeting times accessible to everyone? We currently meet during the workday, but not everyone has the ability to leave work or school. Is having 2 meeting times something that you've seen work?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as the leader who might be the person who's bridging that, or having your core team or members of your core team as they can participate in both meetings is helpful to create continuity of conversation. But often that's a really good way to get around some of these issues of that model of hub and spoke is not working. So maybe you who reach out to those individuals or that second group, or you may ask one of your members who's more connected to those folks to sit down with them one-on-one or sit down with them in a smaller meeting and kind of share what's happening with the coalition, grab their input, and kind of create a running set of notes or a running set of information about how you've gone. So I encourage you to think about it that way. I think that's a great problem solving approach when you really want people, to engage, but you're having struggles with them. So, okay. Someone said, will we cover decision making or how-tos or a process? We don't have a ton of time to get into decision making, and it's something that I want to talk about, and we may actually talk about that in a follow-up around leadership if you guys are interested in more information. Okay.
We did have one more question, Erin.
Oh, great.
Any suggestions on how to get law enforcement on board for checks? Our current sheriff does not like the idea of doing compliance checks on alcohol or tobacco establishments.
Okay. Really, really common problem. First of all, I want to just say, like, we're all in this struggle with you. So sometimes this can be the hardest population or the hardest sector to bring in, and often they are really the most important. So I encourage you to think about the network model here, right? So me coming to you and saying, as a law enforcement officer, hi, I'm Erin, I work in social services and I run this coalition, and I want you to help me with substance misuse prevention by doing this work. So really presenting them the answer to the problem without getting their input can be off-putting. And also, law enforcement has their kind of own language, right? So finding someone in the law enforcement community who can have those conversations is really useful. Having folks who can kind of speak to what you can't is incredibly useful. So harness the people who you do have on your side. Try to bring other people. So if the sheriff's not the right person, are there other folks, maybe former law enforcement or school law enforcement officers, that might be able to present that case in a slightly different way? So I encourage you to think about it that way. They're definitely, it's definitely a common struggle, and often it's because law enforcement thinks about problems in a different way and talks about issues in a different way. And they often don't want you bringing the solution to them. So sometimes our role as leaders is to kind of, and this is a taboo word, right? Is to manipulate people into seeing your point of view and get them to believe that your ideas are their ideas, and get them to come on board with an idea that you kind of walked them towards. Is that helpful? I think I saw a thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and say that was helpful. Okay. And again, if you have had success with law enforcement, feel free to answer Derek's question as well in the chat, because again, this is a really common problem. Okay. So we've talked so much about vision, but I can't underscore how important it is. Because without it, you're not going to have the buy-in, and you're not going to have progress towards your outcomes if everybody is not on the same page. So create excitement and generate ownership. We've talked about that. align different stakeholders. So a vision helps to align the stakeholders on the same focus. How do you get those folks to understand how their contribution aligns with the vision, whether they're kind of further outside in the network or whether they're close as part of that core team? Everyone has to feel that their work contributes to the ultimate vision. Creating a shared vision also helps to involve diverse participants. So, getting all these people to the table, if they see you have your ultimate vision is a healthy community or healthier youth, or they can see that their role in tutoring and dropout prevention is as important as important as and it's as essential to substance misuse prevention as and that vision will help address the vision that they have in their individual work. The shared vision also helps to involve representatives from key stakeholders, even those with power to derail the implementation. So that's the most important. If you have someone whose ability, like business owners are often some of the most powerful in derailing your work. If you can create a shared vision that helps them understand what's in it for them, you can help to bring those folks inside as opposed to having them fight from outside or even fight from within. And the shared vision also really helps this data component that leaders need to focus on, which is you need to focus on measurable results. So your vision has to, and your goals have to have measurable results so that you can get those small wins, so you can get those bigger wins, and so that you can get people to see we are making progress. And that's because of your involvement, right? Yep, SMART goals are a good way to do that. That are, sometimes I forget what SMART stands for. I can't remember the S. Measurable, achievable, results, and time specific. Oh, specific, measurable, achievable, and time bound. I really have a hard time with SMART sometimes. Anyway, that's really important, and it's something that I think we talk about in a lot of our trainings because it's so key to making sure your work realistic. Oh, thank you. It's really key to making sure that we are able to reach those goals. The other piece of a vision is really setting the stage for success. Ensure there's a clear understanding of expectations of the role that you're going to have coalition members play. So again, if you think about that stair step, what are the expectations at each role of those steps and how can you engage with them? What are the expectations of someone who can't be involved in a core team, but can be involved in a more maybe distanced way? And how can you engage them and make sure that it's clear what you're asking of them? Another important success measure or success is that you have to develop opportunities to build skills. So your coalition has to be able to understand the work, understand how to engage in the processes. So you may spend time in some of these coalition meetings or with working with some of these folks in laying out what do we mean by working on process? What is the way that we're going to achieve this? How can they contribute to it? So a lot of that is built in to the work that you're doing as a leader to help build their skills. Respect people's time and limitations. So where can they be on that ladder? And make sure that you're respecting their time and their priorities, and you're focusing your vision and your communication with them about how you have shared goals, whether they're the exact same goal or not, but how can you respect their priorities as well? Recognize people's effort. It's always important, like, hey, you've really been engaged and that's important to us. And thank you so much, member A, member B, and member L, you've been super supportive. We want to recognize that. And whether you recognize that publicly as a group or whether you recognize that individually, just to share with them, hey, your contributions to that component of the work was incredibly useful and I'm grateful for you. I appreciate you. And then build opportunities for fun. And so sometimes those skill building can also be fun. So how do you make sure that you do that in the same breath to keep people engaged and So often I think someone here said, Elizabeth shared that some of her most valuable community partners have been those who never attend coalition meetings. And that's important to remember, that this specific model of coalitions as a table is not always the most successful and not always the most important. And, you know, pressuring people to engage in a certain way can often be off-putting. So if you can find a way to have them engage in a different way that's useful, it can free them up to say yes. So Elizabeth, I think that's very important, and thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Okay. And it is an incredibly good segue for develop multiple avenues for participation. And again, I want to get to this concept of there's networking and support, which is they're maybe on the outside of these kind of coalition meetings or this group work, but they're helping you to network and connect. They are connecting with the group or the goals and contribute in a way that may be slightly different, but is essential. So you can also think about, how do people volunteer to support your community efforts? So if you're doing education campaigns, if you're working with youth and after school programs, there are people who want to and can volunteer to engage in those community efforts and support that work. So think about how you can harness people who maybe are more focused on the work than the process, and how you can engage them. And there are people who are really interested in the process and how things develop. Those are folks who you want to have networking and supporting your work and attending coalition meetings. And then that's how we get to, excuse me, that level of engagement, right, that we talked about. There are different ways that people engage, and you need to think about how you can support them to be there and walk up and down that set of stairs so that they can participate in a way that's meaningful to the project, but also that's useful for them. One of the key roles that leaders do is to communicate. It really helps to improve morale, right? So if you are communicating regularly about things that are important and making sure that everyone, even those people who aren't at meetings or aren't as engaged, understand what's going on, that may encourage them to become more involved. Be attentive to others. So make sure you're hearing what others are saying. So communication is a back and forth ping pong event. It is not just you projecting information. It's hearing from them, answering questions, engaging them. So that's the similar, and takes me right to encourage verbal give and take, and balance advocacy and inquiry. So there's the difference between, I want to understand this and I want to advocate for my own work. So those are some of the more important ways that you can use communication to make sure, and the things you need to attend to as a good communicator to make sure your coalition is engaged, supported, and feels a part of your work. I'm going to pause there for, I'm sorry about my voice. I'm going to pause there for some quick questions. We have a comment in the chat that just says there's an agreement that communication is key. And I think we have one question, Anne. Oh. Do we have a question?
It looks like in the Q&A, we have a question that says, I struggle with outputs versus outcomes. It seems that SPIF coalitions are more focused on outputs. This has been difficult to keep members engaged because they focus on outcomes. How do we get these things to better align?
That is an excellent question. And this is something that I talk a lot about when we think about coalition and sustainability, right? So especially in substance misuse prevention, we often are, reaching the outcomes are often very far away. So reducing youth alcohol use, or understanding that youth, like if an outcome is to reduce youth you know, age at first initiation of alcohol and drug use. That's going to take you to get 12-year-olds to 18-year-olds, you know, through school and then measure if they engaged in that activity or not can often take a long time to both measure and accomplish. And that's okay. So one of your roles as a leader is to ensure that you are making those connections, that you're connecting why the output, meaning we provided education and support to youth, schools, and community members as an output. So we reached, you know, 60 or 70% of our schools. And the reason that's useful is because ultimately engaging those kids in school at an early age will help. And here's the reason we know that. So using evidence-based interventions that show a link between the activity or the strategy and the ultimate goal is one way to really help make sure people understand that. So it's really your job to frame the work and the outcomes so that people can see how it relates. So hopefully that's a useful response. If you have more questions, feel free to throw them in, or any other good advice to attend to that question, please feel free to.
We do one more question in the Q&A, and it's about communication. Could you please define good communication? What does it look like in a practical way?
Sure, that's a great question. Good communication is really finding ways that individual and group members communicate differently and how you can ensure that you are reaching them. So, you know, I feel like a good example is the principal at my son's middle school has gotten really focused on communicating with parents, especially in this time where we may feel disconnected from school for one reason or another. And he sends emails, newsletters, text messages, and holds meetings. So by attending to 4 different ways of communicating, he's getting his message out better. And I respect that. Sometimes it feels like a little overkill when I'm sitting with my girlfriends and everybody's phone dings at the same time because we all got the same text message at the same time. But it's really important. And he communicates with us both, you know, we got a text message about honor roll. We got a text message about a video assembly that we could watch. He also shares with us important meeting information about COVID testing and standardized testing. So really communicating multiple things in multiple avenues is one key that's essential to communication. The other piece is kind of what we just talked about, which is connecting everything to vision, goal, and outcome. So making sure that you're making those connections helps people to understand why this is important. So, you know, again, going back to this example of the middle school principal in my community, he always talks about standardized testings are important because it helps to measure the progress that not only your child is making, but we're making as a school. It helps us in, you know, 1, 2, 3, and 4 ways that are essential to you as an individual. So it gives me the why I care, and to the community that gets to kind of that larger goal of improving the education for all of our youth in the middle schools. So those are some examples of good communication. And, you know, Julie said that communication has gotten more complicated, and some people don't do emails, but they do social media. So that's another good example. So there's often ways that we have to really consider different ways of meeting people where they're at. I think the all virtual nature of our lives has also complicated communication. So that's a great point. So someone asked, are there suggested platforms out there that we could utilize? Excuse me, I can't see all that. Utilize to send one message to coalition members via their preferred methods? You know, that's a great question. Excuse me. And I know there's lots of apps and products and systems out there, things like Constant Contact that can just send an email to a group. And I'm not as familiar with the text applications, but there are definitely ways to do this. So if anyone wants to share how they do that in the chat, I encourage you to do that. Text them all in a bomb, right? So you can do a big text to your coalition members. You want to make sure about not giving away people's phone numbers if they're not comfortable with that, but also making sure that they receive that information. So yeah, I think there's lots of different ways that technology helps us do that. And again, I'm not as familiar with them, but again, if anyone else, so this is called Text 'em All is the name of the textemall.com. So thank you, Juno, for posting that. That's a great example of a application or support method that can help you with that. Bloom's app and Sign Up Genius, those are great examples of ways to reach people via the web. And you can post those kind of Sign Up Geniuses. Dojo is another like school app that you can reach out to teachers. So these are all great. Thank you for sharing those. I think those are great examples of the way that we do. We can harness technology to support our work there. And you want to think about sometimes communicating just to your coalition, but also communicating to a broader audience. So a lot of times social media is a really good way to do that. Engaging your partners to post on their social media to get that message out in a broader way. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about building your skills as a leader. So one of the things that's difficult is that leadership can often be a lot of soft skills that are harder to learn in a webinar and often take more time to develop. So think about building your leadership skills. And there are a number of ways that we can do that. So I just want to share those with you. So one is assessing your capacity as a coalition leader. And we actually have self-assessment. It's a little old, but it's still really useful. And it helps to assess the environment, create clarity around visioning and mobilizing. How do you build trust as a leader? How do kind of assessing your capacity to do that? How do you share power and influence, develop and develop people, and how do you self-reflect? So there's a lot of great questions in that assessment that help both your understanding and your efficacy at those, but also help kind of jar your memory that these are important things. So I encourage you to think about using that assessment to kind of get a feel for what are the important things in these questions that I'm answering, and then how am I doing? And so that's a pretty great tool. And I think it was put in the chat just now. Yep. So I encourage you to look at that. Okay. The other way that we can do it is to learn from others. And there are ways to connect with other leaders in your community. There may be a leadership group that already exists, or it's something you can create, right? So how do you they don't have to be in the same field, but if there's an executive director of the local United Way or the Elks Club or other organizations in your community that you can tap into and bring people together to discuss challenges and successes in leadership, it's a great way to further understand those soft skills and build those soft skills and understand how other people are addressing those challenges. Those are ways I would consider doing that. Having a hard time with the advancing. Enhancing your leadership skills. I'm really curious of ways that you have done this. Have you worked to enhance your leadership skills, and how have you done that? So I ask you to think about adding that in the chat. Sorry. Leadership training. So there are a lot of great leadership trainings out there. I've been to a few back in the day and age when we had when we had in-person trainings. I went to a few-day training on leadership for community change. We actually have a great training on change leadership. So I would encourage you to look up that. I think we have one coming up in the spring. I don't know if we have a registration link for that, but keep your eyes peeled for a Change Leader Academy, which is a way that we build leadership capacity to lead change. Community organizing training, that's a great way to build those leadership skills. Participating in a leadership cohort through extension services. Oh, what a great idea, Elizabeth. Through reading books on leadership. Yeah, just some individual study is often a great way to do that. Listening to the feedback, always understand, always be open to that, hearing what other people's have to say. Oh, look, our Change Leader Academy registration is right there. So I'll be part of that Change Leader Academy as well as my colleague Scott. So I really encourage you to think about that. Taking in mentorship. I think mentorship is a great way. Find someone who you respect and ask them to, like, can we sit down and talk about how you've done the leadership work and you're in the community. I think that's a really great way if you can't find a group. You meet with and you meet with them almost every month. You're mentoring your group. Took a coaching skills for managers and leaders. That's a great example. Yeah, so there's all kinds of ways that we can enhance our leadership. And again, self-study, mentorship, group discussions, all kinds of great ways, and attending trainings where you can find them. Again, we have one coming up, but there's also other examples of great leadership training that helps you build some of those top skills and think about, like, decision making, which is, again, something I think maybe in an advanced course on this, if people are interested, we can think about really diving into decision making and really coalition and group dynamics and group leading and facilitating groups. Clara says she asks questions all the time, and self-reading when she has the time. Yeah, that's kind of one of our problems, right? When do we have time to do that? Okay, I want to take a pause and ask if there are any questions or comments. I'm seeing a lot of great comments. So Anne says that the Rotary charities have been involved in strategic planning training. That's fantastic. If you can find that, that's often going to tap into how you as a leader can do that work. Okay, so I just want to pause for questions now.
We do have one in the Q&A. It says, sometimes we have difficulty deciding on aligning with successful community projects when alcohol is the main fundraiser. You think if you are a coalition that works heavily on underage substance use, should avoid joining the movement or taking it on as an opportunity to show the other side of alcohol use responsibility?
What an excellent question. And there is only a series of complicated answers, and you're going to hate my answer. But it depends, I think, on your community, the community readiness, and the buy-in of your community. So if your community is ready to address underage drinking, bringing those folks in and talking about how they can be supportive of the work is really useful. Engaging them in a way that they can help see how they can contribute to healthier communities, and getting people to understand that healthier communities are more engaged. There's all kinds of outcomes for businesses and community events that are beneficial. So, I struggle with this in my community. One of our biggest community events is a Oktoberfest. We call it Oktoberfest, which is, there's kids activities and a beer garden. And I feel unsettled every year about this event. And we use a lot of the folks who contribute to that event on our local coalition, and that can be a push and pull when we start talking about alcohol availability at community events and how that can lead to underage drinking, or an understanding that alcohol is a part of every event. So, I don't have a good answer, except for understanding the readiness of your community, and the buy-in of your community will really help to motivate and move those folks forward in their support for your work, and their understanding of how it can benefit them. There's some comments that I want to focus on. It's just our PIHP will not allow us to have coalition events at other community events if alcohol is being served. I think that's smart, right? So, if you are not allowed to do that, or you think it's not a great idea, our coalition doesn't show up to Oktoberfest, but we again have a lot of the members who support that. The park district and the village leadership are part of the coalition, and there's a push and pull there. So that's a great point, is that sometimes that's not a good idea, or it's not even allowed. So another major consideration from Jennifer is small family, locally owned businesses, or is it a national corporation? That's an excellent point, right? So are you bringing in, the Budweiser distributor versus a local restaurant that serves alcohol, or a local bar that may have much stronger connections to the community and be more willing to hear your message and how their work contributes and how they benefit from you meeting your goals and outcomes. That's a really great point. Thank you, Jennifer. Elizabeth shares that you also have to be careful about what appears to be an opportunity for funding or programming. Research sometimes reveals that industry backing isn't always immediately clear. Yeah, so being clear about who your funders are, who's supporting you. And there are coalitions who refuse to take any money or support from vendors who serve alcohol or alcohol-backed businesses. So you just want to think about that as well. I think that's a good point. And Jennifer says there's a need for strong community connection. We offer responsible beverage training for local businesses for free. That is a great way to say, hey, I can give you a service that will help ensure that your servers are responsible and really protects you from fines, from serving to, getting caught serving to minors and having to serve, some penalty for that, as well as ensuring that, they are not over serving. And really that you can sell that as one of the ways we get to healthy outcomes is to do this kind of training. I think that's a great example of ways to bring businesses on board. And the more you get them on board, the more likely you are to have them engage in different and more substantial ways. So it's kind of a small win for them or a bigger win for you. And then you can maybe start talking to them about other ways that they can contribute by maybe limiting alcohol sales at community events and the like. I see we have another question or not. Nope. Okay. Other questions or comments? Okay. I want to move forward and ask you guys a couple questions. And so we have a couple of polls that we want to ask you about both. The first one is about leadership training, and would you like more training on leadership? So, and I've already alluded to, there are some we have planned, and maybe we can think about meeting your needs in a different way with a more advanced conversation about that. So I'm seeing great answers, lots of participation in this poll. Please take a minute to answer that, because it's helpful for us in planning and thinking about ways we can support you. So yeah, over 84% of us are saying, yeah, they would like more training on leadership. I'd like to learn more on planning, implementation tactics and strategies. I would encourage you to think about attending a SPIF training. We do a lot of process conversations in those, and how you link, you do planning, implementation, and strategy selection. So I would really encourage you to think about that. Thank you all for taking time to answer this question. It's incredibly useful for me. So I want to go on to our next poll, because we have so many people who've answered this question, and you can write your answer in the chat if you have another question. So the next poll is, if you're interested in additional leadership training, what kind of virtual leadership training modality interests you most? Would you like to do a 3-hour intensive online training? Would you like to come together for a community of practice, which is a way you can connect with other folks doing this work? Would you like individual technical assistance? So meeting with me or other leadership experts where we can kind of help problem solve for your specific issues? Or kind of a self-paced online training that might help you get to those same things. So if you could just let us know kind of what's the best way for you to engage in this work and continue to build your leadership skills. So if you could take a minute. I see lots of people who are saying, they want to engage in more training, and things like intensive trainings, community practice are all all useful. And maybe this type of webinar, again, on a more advanced topic or a different topic, I'm seeing people say this type of webinar is good that we've done today. Okay. Let's go ahead and move forward. And I would like training on community network leaders regarding navigating power and power struggles. Great. I think that's a great, you know, and we're gonna cut and paste some of these ideas. So thank you. Thank you for contributing to that. We can definitely think about adding that to another training. I think that's a great idea. Some people feel like anything longer than an hour and a half can be hard. I get that. Okay. So I'm gonna skip through those. We'd really like to continue this conversation. You guys have been such an active and engaged audience. I'd really like to think about how we can continue this conversation. So I encourage you to go to our Facebook page and I'll show you what that looks like. So it's the Great Lakes Prevention Tech Transfer Center. So you can just look that up in Facebook and follow us. You'll see we're trying to start conversations there and have people engage and share their learning and knowledge, and also access us from the network, those of us who work in the center, to help answer some of your questions. So we would love to see you guys engage in that. So you can see there's also a link to our Facebook page there, and we will probably, I think, be posting a question or pose some issues on leadership in a post there in the next couple days that you can
Erin, and
engage
I'll say it's already there right now. It was
Oh,
posted,
great.
It was posted while you were on here. So
thank you.
hopefully you all will go in there and answer that right now.
Great, thank you. So
Sure.
contributing to that is really useful for your peers, for us. So we'd love to hear your voices on that Facebook page. So thanks for taking the time to do that. Is that my? Oh, I'm having a hard time with my slides here. Oh, so you can click that following button and like the page, and then you'll get hopefully, if you have notifications turned on Facebook, you'll get notifications when something is posted, and be able to get notifications when people respond to you or when other people engage in that conversation. We do have a post training feedback. You can shoot that QR code if you'd like with your phone, and I'll take you right there. Or you can follow that link, which I believe will be put into the chat. So you can do this quick. We mentioned it early at the top of the training that it is a brief 3-minute survey, and it really helps us to understand who's here and how we can continue to support you. If you'd like to sign up for some individual TA, we also have that as an option, and you can see that Chris put that in the link for us. Put the link in the chat for us, and you can go to that site and sign up for times to meet with me, and we can talk about what are your individual needs. So, and again, we mentioned this at the top of the hour, but the recording and PowerPoint and additional resources will be available. It takes us about a week to make sure we've got everything pulled together and get that up for you. And certificates of attendance may take up to 2 weeks. So I also want to let you know that I'm available via email if you have continued questions or want to share information with us or share resources. You can either do that on our Facebook page, or you can do that. You can email me and ask me to post it or ask me to share it with the group. You guys have been an unbelievably engaged and responsive audience. You've contributed so much, and I appreciate you. You know what, Chris, can you answer that question from Elizabeth in the chat? And there's my email, so feel free to just shoot me an email. So we would love to continue to hear from you. Thank you so much for contributing your experience and your questions to this work. And thank you for being here today. So I want to keep you focused, keep you on your schedule, and we are at 11:30 or 12:30 or 10:30 or 9:30, whatever time it is where you're at. We're ready to wrap up. So I will stay on for just a second to see if there are any further questions. I deeply appreciate you being here and contributing to this conversation. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Erin. Have a great day, everyone.